repeat myself, I repeat myself. I'm sorry. This is the part where I repeat myself. I repeat myself. I repeat myself. This is the part where I repeat myself. I repeat myself. Those things he said, those things he did, all piled up our heads. We swam below the river of it all. We floated so far from where we've been. 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 All I'm after is her love and laughter, sweet slides to rough rides, songs in the night. And when I see her, I don't believe her. Her love and laughter holds me.
It's 8:30 Mountain Time, 10:30 Eastern. Thanks for joining us. If you're live on Real Talk this morning, a good Wednesday morning to you. Ryan Jesperson here with you. Samuel G. Brooks, our technical producer, rocking and rolling early out of the gates.
morning.
How you doing this morning?
I'm doing all right.
Feeling good?
Yeah, I'm feeling refreshed today.
Refreshed.
I don't know why I just kind of have that refreshed demeanor today. I don't know.
I would say you look refreshed, but you always look fresh.
I mean, like, showering is like I highly recommend.
Thank you for
You know?
that.
Yeah.
We all appreciate it.
All right, no problem.
Yeah, I mean, we partner with Clean Air Club, and we do what we can to filter out the air here, but still we appreciate when team members shower.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, you have some nice candles for the office too. It's just
Yeah,
like,
we
yeah.
do.
Speaking of things smelling nice and fresh,
Dude, check
like,
it out. Yeah, we've got a. I'm not even going to show the brand. They can pay for it if they want the brand shown. But yeah, we're burning candles.
You fishing
this
for a
morning.
candle sponsor?
Well, a candle sponsor. Well, you got to be careful. We already flirt with sponsorships that are dangerous. Like, I mean, Bitcoin, well, technically is entitled to the first sponsor mention of the day. So we've already
That's true.
We've already
Okay.
broken protocol by mentioning Clean Air Club.
We're gonna get a mean call from Adam.
We're going to get a mean call. But I will say there are some dangerous partnerships you can have. Dairy Queen would be one of them. Michael from Dairy Queen was in the other day and said we'd like to sponsor a freezer to have in the Real Talk studio. We
like,
immediately.
I love and hate that idea.
I love the idea, but it's a terrible idea.
Oh yeah, it's an absolutely terrible idea.
You would be able to watch my evolution over the next couple of years into well, let me just say, it would become very apparent that we had a Dairy Queen sponsorship and that there was a freezer 8 feet from my chair. So we're not going to do that. A candle sponsorship might be equally as dangerous because you'd turn into the like let me give you an example. People that I remember as a young man when I got my first bottle of cologne. And I invested. It was a big expenditure for me. It was very expensive at the time.
Yeah. So you want to wear it.
It was Calvin Klein Eternity.
Ooh.
Yes. And if I remember correctly, it was like, I think about $60 at the time, which was a lot.
Cologne ain't cheap.
No, cologne ain't cheap. You can find cheap cologne, and you will also learn other lessons in life. If you start wearing cheap cologne, you'll learn other lessons. The lesson that I learned was that just because you can no longer smell your cologne doesn't mean that other people can't smell your cologne. And so I would apply the Calvin Klein Eternity. I would go out 10, 15 minutes later, couldn't smell it anymore. I would apply more. Until finally my well-meaning older cousin, Courtney, pulled me aside once and said, hey, like, your cologne's like, we were at a family gathering. She said, it's like really, it's quite strong. And that was a life lesson I learned. If we had a candle sponsor, I suspect it may become overwhelmingly aromatic in here.
going to be very it's going to be like walking into the room after somebody's taken a bath with scented candles and
no one will expect
and bath
it
salts and beautiful oils and all that kind of stuff.
No one will expect it from us.
Exactly.
It's
It'll be great. It's the way that we disguise the studio. Nobody knows where we are because they can't smell us.
We have a panel ready to go right now, and they're sitting here in the bullpen going, we were under the impression, they're chiming in from Ontario this morning, Ryerson University, they're going to be going, we were under the impression that this was a serious radio show, that this was
We're not.
A legitimately serious program, and here these yahoos are talking about candle sponsors out of the gates here. We're going to get to and it's a matter of fact, very serious content. It's going to be kind of a serious show today. In fact, we're going to talk about racism. We're going to talk about grace. In other words, how we treat our homeless population. You may have heard a story that is not a good look on the Edmonton Police Service, and for that matter, the city of Edmonton. We're going to talk to Blake Desjarlais from the Métis Settlements General Council. I've been looking forward to having Blake on the show for a long time. And out of the gates here, we're talking about whistleblower protection. So just another light day on Real Talk, talking about pithy, fluffy subject matter, everybody. In all seriousness, get ready to sink your teeth in just a minute, and we'll be keeping an eye on our hashtag, RealTalkRJ. We're also going to be keeping an eye on our live chat this morning. But first, of course, let me remind you that our presenting sponsor proudly is Bitcoin Well. And, of course, they're keeping an eye on, how can you not keep an eye on crypto these days? It's a big start to 2021 for crypto. Adam O'Brien, the CEO, joined us last week to talk about why he thinks that is. We talked about Wall Street investor confidence. We're going to dig a little bit more into our Why Station question of the week from last week as well. Specifically, I want to get into what you told us, how you feel about crypto and managing your own investments, too. It was interesting. Fewer real talkers than you might think are stepping outside of the big banks. I was a little surprised. If you're interested in learning more about Bitcoin, there's no better place to go than Bitcoin Well. You can find them under the sponsors tab at ryanjesperson.com.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jesperson.
Well, just a few days ago, in post-media papers, the Edmonton Journal in particular, we saw an opinion piece, Alberta whistleblowers need better protection. It describes Canada, a nation known internationally, quote, as the Titanic of whistleblower protection. That's not a good thing. Overblown claims followed by disaster. Writes the author of the piece, astonishingly, Alberta has slavishly followed Ottawa's lead and passed a law that closely resembles the federal law. It does not protect whistleblowers from reprisals. It rarely detects or fixes wrongdoing of any consequence. It's toothless and useless. Well, the author of that piece joining us, and I'm very excited to check in with David Hutton and a couple of his colleagues here joining us live this morning. David, a senior fellow with the Center for Free Expression at Ryerson University. He's worked in the field of whistleblower protection for more than 15 years, including running a whistleblowing charity where he operated a helpline that served more than 400 whistleblowers. Also joined this morning by James Turk, the director of the Center for Free Expression at Ryerson University, and Ian Bron. Ian is a former whistleblower in the federal government and a senior fellow at the Center for Free Expression. He's been assisting other whistleblowers for more than a decade and is researching exactly that at Carleton University in Ottawa. Gentlemen, welcome to the program, and thanks for making time for us this morning.
Good morning, Ryan.
I want to encourage the three of you to jump in and build off what each other says. Don't be shy. Don't wait for me to address you. David, why don't we start with you? You say Alberta whistleblowers need better protection, and now's the time. The government's taking a look at it. Can you bring our viewers, our listeners up to speed this morning?
Sure. Well, what's going on right now is that there's a committee is examining the Alberta law. It's a legal requirement that it be reviewed every so often. And we've presented to that committee, so have others. And right just now, the committee members are looking at really two parallel universes, where the commissioner is telling them that everything is really in pretty good shape. A little bit of tweaking would make things better, but that's all. And we're telling them, as you just read out, this is a completely ineffective law. It's not protecting anyone. And in fact, the evidence is that a lot of people are suffering reprisals. And this affects their health and the safety and the well-being of potentially every Albertan.
James, when we talk about whistleblowing and where legislation falls short, if you're able to, I mean, we have people tuning in from across Canada, of course, so let's talk about the federal law, but let's hone in on Alberta right now. Where would you say the existing legislation falls short?
Well, before we get into that, Ryan, what I'd really like to address is what this means for Albertans. Ian Bron, our colleague Ian Bron, can talk to you most knowledgeably about the very details of where the Alberta legislation falls through. But this isn't what I want to say to your audience is this is not a technical matter. This is a matter of enormous importance. We're all associated with the Center for Free Expression, and part of free expression is not only the right to say what you want to say, but the right for the public to hear and to know. And whistleblowers are one of our best sources of information that governments or corporations or others want to keep hidden from the public. And so whistleblower protection is just so important for the public to be able to know what's going on behind the scenes, things that could have disastrous consequences if they don't come to light. And if people know that they can lose their jobs, that they can suffer reprisals, that they can be put into real trouble for acting in the public interest, for speaking out and sharing with the public things that they found out and aren't being addressed, then we're in big trouble. So this legislation is so important. And as you were quoting from David's wonderful op-ed in last Saturday's Edmonton Journal, the Alberta legislation is worse than useless. It doesn't need to be repaired. It needs to be replaced. It can't be reformed. It's so deeply flawed that what we need is a new piece of legislation to protect Albertans. And just so Albertans don't feel badly, most of the whistleblower protection laws across the country are as bad. So we have a serious problem across Canada, but right now, your legislature has a statutory obligation to review the existing legislation in Alberta. And it's a wonderful opportunity for the province to get it right. Ian could tell you in much greater detail, more knowledgeably and competently than I could, about the details of the Alberta legislation.
Well, I appreciate that, and Ian, I'm looking forward to it because let me tell you that this is an engaged audience. But we're also human beings, and we have natural tendencies, which is once we get into the weeds on policy talk, sometimes our eyes glass over. But the fact of the matter is, this is important to people for very real reasons. And when you start talking about whistleblowers like yourself in past, we start to recognize the courage it takes, in some cases the remarkable circumstances that have prompted people to cross this bridge, to take this step. Ian, can you take us into the psyche of your typical whistleblower, or is that too difficult to do? Do you have to go case by case?
No, I think you can, for genuine whistleblowers, people who are actually raising an issue of public interest concern, the motives are usually the same, which is just to bring up a problem at work and to try to get some sort of solution to fix it. My feeling is that most of them go in thinking that the system's going to work. They believe that their bosses will protect them, that the system will protect them. Unfortunately, what they find out all too often is that the system as it's been developed has so many loopholes, has so many pitfalls, that they end up either falling through the cracks, being personally attacked, and the issue may be addressed, quite often isn't, but they certainly suffer.
What can you tell us a bit about your circumstance back in the day? What prompted you to do what you did, and ultimately what the end result was, what you learned from the process and what it accomplished?
Well, I spoke out at Transport Canada about maritime security issues. And for me, it's really a case of I just didn't want to enable the behavior anymore. I was seeing the regulations being subverted. I was seeing favoritism being played both within the office and between stakeholders, such as between unions and industry and that sort of thing, and just general non-enforcement of the regulations. The organizational reaction was I would describe it as instinctive. It was instinctively negative, and they just pulled out everything to make my life a living hell. That lasted for a few years. You know, it cost me my marriage at the time. I ended up having to leave work. It's exhausting, and I think the thing is for most whistleblowers is that it it's not over quickly. It just drags out and wears you down. The bad guys, they have almost infinite resources, but you're just on your own. And eventually you have to make a choice. Do I keep fighting, or do I just put this down and move on with my life?
So let me, from a layperson's perspective, let me put this in front of the three of you and sort of get you to respond, because the impression I get, I mean, I've a letter here that was written. It's signed by you, David, Senior Fellow, Center for Free Expression, Ryerson University. You've written it to David Chanson, the chair of the Standing Committee on Resource Stewardship, the Alberta Legislature building. It's not a good letter. It's a letter that indicates that you believe that basically the commissioner in Alberta is making statements that are false or misleading, including about your organization. You say claims are being made with no supporting evidence, claims that defy your decades of experience and research. It doesn't sound like the process is going very well here. So if I were to ask you, why should Albertans have confidence in the process? Why should Albertans have confidence that whistleblower legislation will improve in favor of the good guys here? Is there any reason for you to say that Albertans should? I mean, you're waving the red flag, essentially.
Yeah, I think whether Albertans have confidence going forward really depends on the actions of the committee. I sympathize with the committee members because as I said, they've been presented with two completely incompatible views of the world, one being ours and others being the commissioners. And they have to sort this out, and that's what the letter is all about. How are they going to figure out which view of the world is correct? Because only one of them can be. And at the moment, as it stands, the commissioner is being asked to help them make that decision, which obviously is not appropriate. We believe that the commissioner should perhaps turn to an internationally respected outside body to comment on the two analysis of the law that have been done, ours and the commissioners.
David, what would you say is the most egregious misrepresentation or false claim or position taken by the commissioner here, so Albertans understand what's going on?
Well, the really extraordinary one is they've claimed that no whistleblower has been subject to reprisals. And as I said, that just flies in the face of logic, experience, research that works. In fact, the Commissioner's own reports indicate that no less than 55 whistleblowers have come to our office with formal complaints of reprisal. And what the Commissioner claims is that they've investigated every one of them, and none of these were founded. None of these people have been allowed to go to the tribunal that could possibly give them a remedy, some kind of compensation for the reprisals. And, you know, this is an extraordinary claim. It's the kind of claim that should be backed up with extraordinary evidence, but the evidence is absent, and the only evidence that exists, as I said, is that people are suffering reprisals.
So, Ryan, could I just
please do, yeah.
There are countries in the world with good whistleblower protection legislation, and when you have good whistleblower protection legislation, you see the number of whistleblowers that would typically come out in country the size of Canada or in a province the size of Alberta. So the claim that there hasn't been one that needed protection is just ludicrous. And what's also worrying is the committee. I mean, the committee, David's right, has a really tough job in front of it. It's been presented with two quite opposite analyses of what's happening with the legislation. And as David was suggesting, what they've done to try to sort this out is they've asked the commissioner to report to them. I mean, it's asking one of the two teams in a football game when there's a dispute about a decision to be the referee, which is really inappropriate. I mean, it's important for Albertans that the committee be able to get this right. A lot rests on it for ordinary Albertans. And so that's what David's letter is about, is to suggest ways in which there are wonderful third parties they could bring in to help them sort this out.
So when you talk about whistleblowers, typically it's an individual that has, I would imagine, and correct me if I'm wrong, they've either experienced something or they see something happening around them. They don't believe that if they run it up what maybe the traditional channels, in other words, their supervisor or otherwise, that it would be handled properly or effectively in some circumstances, I would imagine, because perhaps their supervisor is complicit in what's happening. I'm trying to think of like the most obvious example of a whistle. I'm thinking of Edward Snowden. I don't know. Maybe there's probably hundreds or thousands throughout history. But what I note with Mr. Snowden, some people think that he's accomplished something incredibly important. Other people think he should be hanged for treason. So it's not as though everybody always sees eye to eye with the whistleblower or the act of whistleblowing, right? I mean, Ian, am I onto something?
Yeah, Ryan, I think, Edward Snowden is an extraordinary whistleblower in every respect. He's very atypical. And, the issue of whether he's a hero or a bad guy, the real question is, would you want to know what he revealed? And when you ask people that, the answer is generally, yeah, we needed to know about that. Your typical whistleblower is very different. It's someone without his depth of knowledge and understanding of what's likely to happen to them. And so they typically do take it up the line, as you described, through their management chain, believing that along the line, at some level, they'll encounter someone who wants to get the problem fixed. And they simply are doing this because they see it as an extension of their duties as their job. And then when things go wrong, only at that point do they perhaps realize that what they were doing was blowing the whistle, and begin to look for support and look at the laws and so on. So people are very often well into the process before they even think of themselves as whistleblowers, or start looking at agencies like the commissioner or organizations like ours that can provide them with advice.
I've got some interesting comments here on our live chat. Scott, for example, says, I don't like the term whistleblower. I think it frames people like snitches. People who call out illegal actions are social heroes at the cost of not doing so, or as the cost of doing so or not doing so is often very large. Others are saying, I mean, there's several of these comments, so let me just summarize. People are saying they're not sure that they trust this government. Anyway, gentlemen, I don't think it's going to be news to you that this government has trust issues. I'm talking about Alberta's provincial government. So I'm not sure that people believe that this government would enact any legislation that would protect individuals from speaking out, most especially against corporations or government. I don't get the sense that this government is the government that would do that. Ian, what should legislation look like? What should either a third party or the Alberta government, what should the conclusion look like that they should reach?
Well, the ultimate goal of any whistleblowing legislation is first to identify and correct whatever wrongdoing or error occurred, and the second is to protect the whistleblower. The problem with the current legislation is it really, really fails to protect the whistleblower. There's just so many loopholes. There's so many ways that organizations can attack the whistleblower that they're left exposed. There's no requirement for the organization to protect them. The whole process takes so long that inevitably the whistleblower will be ground down. There are some great laws out there that exist already. Places like Serbia, even. Ireland has a great law. And what that does is it puts protecting the whistleblower first and foremost. And it also ensures that by protecting the whistleblower that the issue gets addressed. As long as the whistleblower survives, the issue will stay in the public domain.
So ultimately, where do we go from here? I mean, you've participated, you've stated your case. There's a letter dated February 7th where you thank this committee, the Standing Committee on Resource Stewardship, for the opportunity to present. But you indicate, as mentioned, David, that you're completely unsatisfied with the way that the process is going. So what happens from here? Here's the thing. This is an audience that's engaged. This is an audience that speaks out. And I'm going to give this audience credit for doing a lot of work on a couple of important files in Alberta, including on the coal file. This audience can make noise when it needs to. What's the call to action here?
I mean, I think the first call to action, Ryan, is for people to understand the importance of the committee and this government or a future government getting it right and providing real protection, so that problems that people see and aren't being addressed can be brought to the public attention. There is concern with the term whistleblowing. We haven't come up with a better one. What we're talking about is basically somebody's right to speak up when they see wrongdoing or something of concern that's going to hurt the public interest, so that it can be addressed. So first of all, people have to be aware that this is an important issue for them. And secondly, they need to make clear to members of the committee and the government that having how serious the problems are needs to find.
James is cutting in and out here. James, I apologize. We're kind of losing you. You're cutting in and out here.
Website, cfe.ryerson.ca.
Tell you what I'll do. David, I'll get you to pick up from there. James, I apologize, James. I'm stepping on your toes, but the signal's cutting in and out, so we can't hear what you're saying. But David, he was pointing out there, cfe.ryerson.ca. I'll ask you to issue the same call to action.
Yes, absolutely. We want to hear from people. If you go to the CFE Ryerson website, cfe.ryerson.ca, you can find out about our centre. We're very keen to hear from people in Alberta who've had dealings with the commissioner, who've tried to use this whistleblowing system, because we believe that it's being misrepresented how effective that is, and we can publicise that information. And I'll just add that if you look at other countries, the only thing that has caused governments to pass whistleblower protection is intense pressure from the public, often resulting think that the current situation with the virus is a very good example of a huge and difficult situation that's probably being handled rather badly in many places. And whistleblowers could help make sure that things are done right.
I guarantee you there are people that are watching. There's probably one person watching right now that is sitting on a powder keg. And Ian, you've walked a mile in those shoes, and you've been to a position where you've weighed the pros and cons, and you've tried to decide if it's worth it to speak out. And maybe you didn't even know at the time that you might pay for it with your marriage, or you might encounter horrific challenges. Maybe your name might be dragged through the mud, or there would be reputational consequences. What would be your message to that one person maybe that's watching right now that's trying to decide whether or not they are going to blow the doors off an explosive story?
Oh, that's a tough one, because everybody's circumstances is different, but and it depends very much on the seriousness of the problem. I mean, if life is on the line, I would say that you really have a moral obligation to speak up. The problem is you also have to protect yourself, and you have to protect your family. So I would advise people to get advice, actually, either from a lawyer or from some place like the Center for Free Expression whistleblowing initiatives. That advice and support will take you a long way. You'll avoid the pitfalls a little more easily, and you'll have that social support along the way.
Well, let me read a couple comments here, and then I was wrapping here, but there's a great question that we should get back to from an audience member. Kim says, I got in trouble during an AER, Alberta Energy Regulator, another organization that a lot of Albertans have trust issues with, and for good reason. Kim says, I got in trouble during an AER budget energy issue sharing errors I found. It turns out my vice president was being shady, and I inadvertently outed her. I got my only career HR reprimand. That from Kim. Here's another one. Mark is watching in from Utah. He says, my company actually has an anonymous reporting website to report any wrongdoing. Interesting. Let me say as an aside, I'll just plant this seed. I'm not sure I trust anonymous surveys and websites within corporate structures. I've heard people that have theories about paying the price after they've said things. And this is an interesting question here. Listener wonders, in circumstances, by the way, Shalane says another name for whistleblower could be lightcaster, which I think is great. Angie wonders, and we'll make this our last question. Angie wonders, do we know if whistleblower protections, effective ones, in other countries have actually increased instances of whistleblowing? And has it maybe led to an increase of whistleblowing where it maybe wasn't the right option? That's an interesting question from Angie, if one of you would like to take that on.
David?
I actually didn't hear the full question, Ryan. I'm sorry, you were cutting out.
Oh, that's no problem, David. In other countries, has robust whistleblower legislation led to increased instances of whistleblowing, and has it been a good thing?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at other countries that have effective systems, there's a constant flow of people coming forward. Now, and if you just look around recently, you'll see some extraordinary examples, for example, in the States, where there's been dramatic revelations about how the virus has been handled, about brought forward by people, and they've generally been successful. They've generally been able to influence the course of events dramatically. And there's no question that this is a good whistleblower protection system, helps protect the public every time.
Gentlemen, really appreciate your availability on this and your good work on whistleblowing. You never know who you may have impacted or been speaking directly to this morning, and we're grateful for that. To Ian Bron, to David Hutton, to James Turk, thank you so much for joining us here on Real Talk.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you.
Real Talkers, I'm keeping an eye here. Yeah, by the way, let me clarify something. Some random guy says, looks like Real Talk needs a sponsor for better internet. It's not us, right? Can we clarify? Sam Brooks is the technical producer of the show, and you're running our numbers. We're good, aren't we?
Our numbers are good, yeah. Occasionally we get, like, Zoom is going to Zoom sometimes.
Yeah.
And it's not...
I guess
we've all lived on the internet, and we all know that, like, those, the apps sometimes fail us. You know
what I
mean?
want to say, though, what I want to make clear is that thanks to your support on Patreon, at RyanJesperson.com. I'm actually, like, I don't know the technical stuff, but what I do know is we have
gigabit. That's a flex. You can flex gigabit.
Gigabit?
Yeah.
Okay, gigabit.
It's okay. You can.
Is that like
it's something you can brag about.
I was going to say, for people like me that don't really know what we're talking about, we have, like, our internet's like I told the guy on the phone, we want Ferrari fast. And he said, we'll get you Ferrari fast. So we have Ferrari fast internet. And then for those of you that know what you're talking about, Sam can clarify and give you, like, all the actual. So it ain't us, and it's not our internet. Regardless, really appreciate those three joining us. This is I'm curious to know. I'm curious to know how you feel about what you just heard with regards to whistleblowers. And I haven't had a chance to look back on our live chat. You know who's going to do that, by the way? Who's going to be all over our live chat is our Chase producer. And if you didn't hear yesterday, and if you didn't see it on Twitter, we're very excited to have posted a job opening yesterday. It's open until Friday, February 26th. The competition is wide open to anybody, really, that would like to be a part of this team. You can find the job description at ryanjesperson.com/team. Or I have the listing posted. It's pinned right at the top of my Twitter profile. When we get a Chase producer in here, that individual is going to be all over the live chat, all over social media, fact-checking. Their job is going to be very dynamic and demanding, and we're very excited to add that individual to the team, whomever they may be. So on the live chat, though, I'd be curious to know, and we'll try to look back and get some comments here relating to whistleblower protection. I was intrigued by Mark's comment where he said, my company has an anonymous form to submit anonymously, and I kind of went, yeah, I don't know about that. Like, I've seen, and this is anecdotal. I have no evidence. I have no proof, but I've worked for big companies. I've worked for the biggest media companies in Canada. Back in the day, Southam. I've worked for Post Media. I've worked for Bell. I've worked for Bell Globe Media, for Rogers, for Chum, and for Chorus, and vis-a-vis Shaw. So these are like all the major players. And we would often, and this is from company to company to company, and you're probably the same way if you've worked for a big company. You get these surveys that are like, this is an anonymous survey. And you're completing it from your desktop via your company email, and it's like, I'm making these up, but, like, do you respect your boss? Like, are you happy? Would you recommend working here to somebody else? Do you feel protected if you were to raise an issue of concern? In some circumstances, the most recent ones I filled out because the company's rather sensitive right now. How do you feel about the company's approach to racial awareness or to equity or these types of things? And I would hear from colleagues anecdotally, one in particular that was laid off shortly after. And again, anecdotal, right? Someone's going to say, Jesperson trying to make it sound like the person got fired because they did the... No, I'm not. It's just anecdotal. But people that were like, no, I'm not happy here. My boss is brutal, incompetent. They don't listen to me. They don't take equity seriously. I'm a woman. I'm not treated well. I'm not respected. These people have a way of, finding their way out against their will. I'm just saying, do you really believe, and maybe Mark does, I don't even know the name of Mark's company. It's in Utah. I don't know where he works. I know he works in tech. Do you have, if you really, honestly had a serious concern that would shake the foundation of your company, of your corporation, that would call out senior leadership or even your immediate supervisor, would you really trust an anonymous corporate survey? I just don't think I could. We have Irshad Manji standing by, right? Ready to go. So I'll tell you what I'm going to do, because we can do whatever we want, is we're going to skip our 9 o'clock newscast, but I do want to mention a couple of our partners that make sure that we're on the air each and every morning. Kubi Energy is one of them. I had an awesome meeting, a Zoom meeting yesterday with Jake and Adam at Kubi. I am not at liberty to discuss what we got into, except to tell you that later this spring into the summer, we are rolling out a promotion on Real Talk that is going to grab your attention and not let go. That's right. They've dreamed up a contest that is incredibly exciting. They're in the business of solar installation. Let's just leave it at that. They operate out of head offices right here in Edmonton and Kamloops, BC, using only certified installers. They're Tesla certified. The entire company is, and they handle all your paperwork. It doesn't get any easier. If you have questions right now, is solar a good fit for you or not? No question is a dumb one. Trust me, I've asked the dumbest, and they've assured me that it's okay. You can find Kubi Energy online just under the sponsors tab at ryanjesperson.com. That's also where you'll find the team at Clean Air Club at cleanairclub.ca. You can directly reach their website. They're in the business of furnace filters, and they know that we forget. We're not lazy. We're just busy, and, it gets to a point where obviously you haven't changed your furnace filter for 6 months, and who's paying the price? You are. But let me take you on a bit of a guilt trip here. So is your family, your pets, your roommates, maybe your tenants in the basement suite. You got to change that furnace filter so you can save money with Clean Air Club and breathe easy at cleanairclub.ca. All right, let's get into this. This is great. Coming up February 18th, that's tomorrow. It's a virtual event co-sponsored by the Edmonton Shift Lab, Edmonton Public Library, and the Peter Lougheed Leadership Center at the University of Alberta. It's an event, the speakers series, touching on moral courage in messy times. And the keynote speaker is a name well known to Canadians. She's the founder of the Moral Courage College, the author of Don't Label Me, Irshad Manji. Welcome to Real Talk, and thanks for making time for us this morning. I think you might be on mute, my friend, but we'll get it. There you are.
There we go.
There you go. Well done. Welcome
Ryan,
to the show.
I have to tell you, I've been listening for the last few minutes. You are on fire.
Well, do you try? Would you trust? And this is like, I want to be clear. This is purely anecdotal. Although I have to say, Irshad, I'm only 3 months removed from a big corporation. I'm not used to being able to speak like this. But yeah. But do you have a certain sort of inherent distrust of things like anonymous corporate surveys?
Of course.
Yeah.
To be blunt, Ryan, and I hate to admit this, but here you are already putting me on the psychotherapist couch. I have a distrust of a lot of information that we're all quote unquote given these days. There was a time not so long ago, right, when you could read the major newspapers, watch, major newscasts and think, okay, I've got the facts. But today, even those sources that are attributed, not anonymous, are spun. So here's the deal, friend. Everyone's got an agenda. That includes me. That includes you. So rather than take it on faith that something is true, if you really care about the issue, and I mean really care about it, engage.
I love it. I love it. And
read all kinds of sources, including ones that disagree with one another. Connect some dots and reach your own conclusions.
We've been taught. It's like you're reading our mail. We've been talking about this last week on the show. We had a couple of interviews with an elected official, an MLA here in Alberta by the name of Drew Barnes, who's joined this End the Lockdown caucus with names you'll recognize. Like I'm trying to think of like Maxime Bernier is one of them, and other elected officials. They think it's time to end the lockdown. We talked to a retired lieutenant colonel out of the Canadian Armed Forces that drew up Alberta's pandemic plan back in 2005. He says we shouldn't be locked down at all. He says he's skeptical about masks, and people were like lighting their hair on fire. A lot of people were saying, why the hell would you have people like this on the show? Well, then we brought on a panel of physicians yesterday to comb through those interviews and say, well, here are our concerns, and here are the important fact checks here. And I think that instead of pretending like these politicians, the retired lieutenant colonel, like these voices, instead of pretending like they don't exist, I think oftentimes we want to pick their brain, understand what makes them tick, fact check them, and then at the end of the day, be able to rebut other people that say we shouldn't wear a mask, and you say, well, here's why an ICU doctor says that you should.
Ryan, again, this is what journalism is supposed to be about. And, I thank you for remembering that. Let me ask you something. People who write to complain that you've got these other voices on, what do they say? What do they tell you about why they're complaining?
Oh, that's such a good question. Well, I don't. I mean, you know what? The word that I really am having a hard time with is the word platform. And a lot of people are saying, why is Jesperson platforming these voices? Why are we platforming this type of anti-science rhetoric? I would say that's the common theme.
Fair enough. Well, folks, for those who are wondering, and trust me, I'm as pro-science as it gets, this is why Jesperson platforms the anti-science people, precisely because he wants to know why they believe what they believe. He wants you to understand where they're coming from, if only so that you can then take what you hear from them. And when you're talking to an anti-science person, these people on Jesperson's show said, you can then frame your own pro-science argument in a way that takes the anti-science bias into account. And that way, the person who would otherwise dig in his or her heels because you're pro-science and they're not, they may very well have a fighting shot at now hearing you because you have first heard them. And guess what? This brings us actually to what moral courage means in a polarized time like ours. Moral courage means listening before labeling.
This is, I feel like it almost seems like too obvious of a segue to go from a panel talking about whistleblowing straight into a conversation about moral courage in messy times. Am I trying too hard to draw a line here?
No, you are not. In fact, I'm the one who kind of gave you that segue, right? Because here's the deal, Ryan. That's what I'm going to be talking about on Thursday night as part of Thinking Speaker series. Look, we live in times when it is the easiest thing in the world to lapse into an us against them paradigm. Now, I'm not here to say, why can't we all just get along? No, that is not my message. The reason we can't all just get along is that we are wired as human beings to seek out threats, okay? And these days, a threat doesn't have to be mortal danger. A threat can be perceived as mere discomfort. So if someone is disagreeing with you, the brain will actually play a trick and say, whoa, defend yourself, i.e., get defensive because your existence is in danger. No, it's not. No, it's not. Your existence is not in danger just because you're being disagreed with. What is in danger is your ego. And so when it comes to moral courage, it's not just that we need to speak truth to power. That's the easy part of moral courage these days. Everyone's got something to speak truth to, right? No, it is speak truth to the power of your own ego. Tame your ego just long enough to listen to where other people are coming from. That doesn't mean, by the way, that you agree with them. Listening is not the same thing as agreeing with. Listening simply means you clear space for other people to explain where they're coming from. And guess what? This is the beauty of listening, is that you pick up on their values. And if you're still convinced that your position is the right values into how you frame your position to them. So you see, it's not about us against them. It's about us and them. And that paradigm means that you can actually collaborate on enduring solutions. You don't have to have a nasty showdown every time someone disagrees with you.
Our live chat, Irshad, right now is going nuts. Scott says, I absolutely love that she turned the interview around on Ryan. Patrick says, I like when she puts, she says, Shane says, yeah, great job. Throw it back at Jespo. They say, Eri said, Straya says, I've never heard of this guest before and I love her. Yeah, people are saying, awesome guest. This guest is awesome. Brandon says, I wish I had the patience for those people, but I simply don't. We'll come back to that in a second. Others are comparing you, by the way, to Dr. Jody Carrington. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the name. She's a counseling psychologist. She's been on the show. She's a legend. And people are saying that you are channeling her, or maybe she channels you. I don't know. Linda Ray says, Irshad's been waking people up for quite some time. Her entire body of work is fierce. Penny says, I've just followed Irshad on Twitter. Thanks for bringing people like her to the front of the pack. Kim says, moral courage. She's speaking to my soul in a way I feel like I've never heard. And Chad says, I think this might be my favorite guest on Real Talk so far, which is pretty awesome. Now, let me ask you.
Maybe he just started listening yesterday.
He may have just tuned in this morning, and it may just be a shot at our previous panel. But let me ask you, Irshad, back to that comment from the listener that says, from Brandon, that says, I wish I had the patience for these people. I simply don't. I was talking to a friend the other day and he said to me, he goes, hang on a second. Because I was having this conversation with him. I was actually blowing off a little steam about how I feel about the word platforming. I said to him, do you remember when platforming used to be called talking to people? Right. And he said, hang on a second though. He's a great devil's advocate. And he said, so what are you going to bring on, like a neo-Nazi? Are you going to bring on the Grand Wizard of the KKK to pick their brain? I said, no. Like, obviously, we're going to draw the line somewhere. So Irshad, where do we draw the line, right? Mm-hmm. Who do we not hear out?
Yeah. So look, Jespo, you are in a position of being a public figure. I get why you wouldn't justify, and maybe shouldn't justify having a time. And, you don't want to be accused of legitimizing something so toxic. I get that. But let me tell you, in my book, Don't Label Me, How to Do Diversity Without Inflaming the Culture Wars. That's my latest book. And in it, I tell the story of a certified white supremacist who was outed on who was living in the same dormitory room as him, same dormitory building as him, invited this white supremacist over for Shabbat and didn't lecture him during dinner about his neo-Nazi views, but just started asking sincere questions. And over the course of a year, that neo-Nazi changed his mind. Why? Because the and just wanted to get to know where he was coming from. Racism views down the white supremacist's throat. The white supremacist therefore could trust that he wasn't there just to be bullied or picked on or, or punched around, but instead was there because his dinner host really cared about him and his life. And that is when the emotional defenses of the white supremacist came down, and that supremacist could finally hear something he was never capable of hearing before, which is why he needed to rethink his views. So when your viewer or listener says, I just don't have the patience for these people, understand that you may not have the patience for them, but by being so defensive in your own right, you are leaving change on the table. So just come clean, folks, come clean. Do you want to have that feel-good moment where you're thumping your chest saying, screw you, I'm right, you're wrong, and that's all there is to it? Because, if that's all you want out of the encounter, say so. But if you actually want to make a difference, then the sincerity of that motivation will mean you do develop the patience.
I want to mention this a couple times. The event that you're at the keynote at tomorrow night, people can check it out at epl.ca/speakers-series. And you'll notice, Real Talkers, that we're putting that web address up under Irshad's on the font that we're showing there. So you'll see it on your screen several times. But epl.ca/speakers-series. And if you missed it, you can always just hit me up on Twitter and ask me to send it to you. We talk about shaming, and Irshad, I wish I could remember the context of it, but I had a great conversation publicly on social media about 6 months ago. And I had kind of, in a glib kind of a way, called out the dogs and sort of said, wouldn't it be a shame if this person started to trend? We sort of see this, like, if people found out, like, what if their employer found out how they feel about this, or what if their spouse found out? As a matter of fact, I have an Uncle Larry. He actually is. That's not a slur. His name actually is Larry, and the guy is a complete prick. And as a matter of fact, this guy is a blood relative. And I would love to relieve him of some of his dental assets. That's how much of a jerk this guy is. And the reason that I feel this way is because I came across. I'm laughing because my family knows I actually want to bury this guy alive. So I laugh so I don't actually drive to his house and do it. I found his profile on social media on Facebook a while ago. He is probably the nasty. He probably says nastier things about me than anybody else. This is a guy I have dined around the Thanksgiving table with before, and I uncovered this Slimeballs Facebook account and saw the stuff he was writing about his own nephew. And you know what I did? I wrote a long letter to my aunt, to his wife, because I thought, if there's one way I can make your life miserable, Uncle Larry, it's going to be on your home front, where you're going to deal with your wife, Julie, and you can deal with her time. And I want to name his wife just in case there's any confusion about which Uncle Larry I'm talking about. I'm talking about this one. Okay, now that we've had some fun, serious business, shaming, yay or nay?
Hands down, nay.
Thought so.
And here's why. Shaming doesn't work. Shaming leads to people feeling humiliated. And you know what happens when people feel humiliated, Ryan? A lot of the time, they get radicalized. So not only do they become more entrenched in the very views that you're shaming them about, but then they feel the need to weaponize that feeling of humiliation. And what I find fascinating is that here in the United States, I'm joining you from New York City, this is exactly what's happening on both the left and the right, is that, loudmouths from each of those sides are hurling labels and epithets and insinuation, innuendo, and insults at one another. as if that's going to make any kind of a difference. The only difference it makes, let's be honest, speaking of agendas like we were, doing earlier on in this convo, the only difference it makes is that they get more followers. It doesn't change the minds of the people whom they're tearing apart. And maybe, again, let's get brutally honest, folks, okay? If you don't care about changing minds, say so. Say so, because I need to know what your game is, right? But if you do care about changing minds and you shame people for not having changed their mind, you're only making the problem worse. And you're outing yourself as the equivalent, the moral equivalent of the very people you hate. How do you like them apples?
Well, you're giving me too much to think about.
God forbid.
I know. I've already got,
Don't go there.
I've got people are writing now. People are chiming in saying, you feel better now, Ryan? Other people are saying, don't worry, we all have an Uncle Larry. But there are some serious, there's some great, how about this from Kvitch, who says, yeah, but it's exhausting for people who are being actually bullied or mistreated, racism or otherwise, to have to find the space and the time and the patience to coddle these people.
Yeah, listen, dude, I am not saying that if you are, bullied, that you then make the space within your mind and your heart to engage people in, quote, rational dialogue. No, bullying is not okay. Now, let me ask you, though, the person who said this, how do you define bullying? If by bullying you mean that you are being made to feel like you're less than human, that I get. And you have every right to say, not play in this game and walk away. But that you are being disagreed with, sorry, that's not bullying. That's living in a democracy. So we've also got to take some responsibility on ourselves to figure out, is this a situation where my ego is I'm fragile and I can't handle it? Or is this really a time when I need to walk away because if I don't, I'm going to relieve someone of their dental assets?
I'm a little surprised I said that, but
very eloquent.
It was eloquent, and I don't take it back. Irshad, I'm taking a look at your book, your most recent one, and there's an interest. Everybody, publicists or publishers will send out the books to certain people and say, would you provide a review here, for example? We'd love to hear your take on the book, and maybe we'll even print it on the book. Well, on the cover that I saw, there's an endorsement from Chris Rock, and I thought, like, that Chris Rock, like one of the most famous comedians in the world, who calls your book genius. Why do you think Chris Rock cares about these ideas?
Ryan, I lost you there for about 5 seconds, but I think I know what you're asking.
Why does Chris Rock care? Yeah, why does he care about your book? Yeah.
Yeah, because this book, among other things, is a defense of free expression. Chris Rock is in the business of free expression. And he has said publicly that he will no longer appear on university campuses with his shows because, every second thing that comes out of his mouth, he is told that, he is triggering people. And his whole point is, look, again, how can you live in a democratic society if you're going to sort of walk around looking to be offended, right? This is what living in a democracy is about. And by the way, it's also what diversity is about, believe it or not. Diversity isn't just about skin color or gender or sexual orientation or religion. It's all of those things, but it's more. It's also about different viewpoints. And so we've got to recognize that being offended and inadvertently giving offense is not a barrier to diversity. It's the price of diversity. Are we willing to accept that? And I say this mostly to my fellow liberals and progressives who, of course, are out there, banging the drum for diversity. Are we willing to accept that diversity of viewpoint is part and parcel of diversity itself? Because if we're not, don't be surprised when skeptics of diversity say it's a sham and a scam. It has no integrity.
I've been fascinated by, and I mean, people can Google it. I think most people are aware of the Chicago Principles and the letter that was sent to freshmen incoming class to say, if you're used to shutting down debate and dialogue, this is not going to be the university for you. And over the past, I don't know what it is, 8 or 10 years or something like that, there's a lot of universities that have gone on board, like Princeton and Purdue and others. Irshad, I don't know if you're aware, but really interesting with Alberta's United Conservative government when they came in, one of the priorities of the Premier, Jason Kenney, was to say that we demand, and he essentially held it over the head of the universities in a funding context, said we demand that there be equal voices presented, that people be able to speak freely on campuses because they perceive there to be an anti-conservative bias at these universities. And the Premier thought that if he could threaten them with funding, that he may turn that tide. It's remarkable coming from a Premier that tried to have his former Jesuit college in San Francisco stripped of its Catholic designation because they were allowing pro-lifers to talk on campus. The hypocrisy abounds. But are you concerned?
Exactly.
To bring this back to what Chris Rock told you, are you concerned about the state of university college campuses these days?
Yeah, of course I'm concerned about it. Again, as somebody who is speaking tomorrow night as part of Freedom to Read Week, in Canada, I am absolutely concerned, not just about the state of free expression on university campuses, but frankly, in all of our institutions, including our companies, our workplaces, our K-12 school system. And let me just say real quick about politicians getting involved in the so-called step away from the culture wars. Because here's the thing, any right-wing politician who gets involved and tries to threaten a university's a perceived anti-conservative bias is only politicizing this issue. And they are absolutely the wrong messengers, politicians, because guess what? At the drop of a hat, they too will shut down anything that they don't want to hear. Okay? So you're right. Politicians are hypocrites. In a sense, they have to be in order to keep party unity. And that's why, Jespo, seriously, that's why politicians are not the right people to be having these discussions and dialogues. It is us, citizens, who need to be learning how to engage one another. By the way, in the United States, there's a very interesting phrase, you may or may not already know it, that politics is downstream from culture. Do you know what that means?
Will you judge me? Will you judge me if I ask you to explain it?
Not openly, I won't judge you.
Okay.
But what that means is that politics is shaped by culture. And who is it that creates culture? People, ordinary people. So if we learn to develop the patience to engage with people whom we have profound disagreements with, that will create a culture in which politicians then have no choice but to will demand it of them in order to get things done. This is why the ultimate solution lies with us. Why, Ryan, I'm committed to sort of transforming education, K-12, so that young people begin to learn how to communicate with one another across lines of difference. If they don't, then nothing is going to change. The only wheel that moves will be the hamster wheel of dogma, with the cynicism that we already feel about democracy deepening and the noise amplifying.
At the end of every show, we task Sam Brooks, our technical producer, to pick about a 2-minute clip that we'll push out on Twitter to tease people, to hook them, to get them to watch the whole thing. And
I have like 10 circles.
I don't know how the hell you're going to find just 2 minutes out of this interview, Sam, but that's not my problem. Irshad, that's his problem.
That's right.
You are a New York Times bestselling author. You will be speaking virtually to Albertans tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. Your new book, Don't Label Me, How to Do Diversity Without Inflaming the Culture Wars. Again, people can find tickets to that or more information on the event at epl.ca/speakers-series. Irshad, I am already looking forward to your next appearance on this show. Thank you so much for hanging out with us today. We really appreciate it.
It was entirely my pleasure. And folks, just remember, this is a free event.
Free event is what she's saying. Thanks very much, Irshad. That was a great conversation to have. I love the fact that the Chicago principles came up at the end. I actually think the Chicago principles are great. And I should probably have them all in front. I should probably have that letter from the dean. That first one, I think it was 2013, 2014 that it first went out. We can fact check that. But it basically told incoming freshman class, like, if you're here to try to shut down discussion and debate on things you don't agree with, this ain't your university. It's not going to happen. You're going to be confronted with opinions that are different than your own. It'll force you to think. It'll put your, I love that Irshad used the word dogma. It'll put your personal dogma through the ringer. And I've always thought we should challenge our beliefs, whether it's religion, politics, economics, whatever. Like, if you truly believe that your personal foundational principles are strong, if you believe that you have poured a strong foundation upon which you will build your ideology, then why would you be nervous to test it? Why would you be nervous to debate your position? Why would you be nervous to read something from an author that you might not agree with? Why would you be nervous to listen to interviews that may fly in the face of what you believe to be true? If your foundation is strong and you can challenge your beliefs with dissenting or different beliefs and emerge unscathed, in other words, still believing what you did before, doesn't that strengthen your belief? Doesn't that strengthen your resolve? And if you listen to different opinions and ultimately end up changing your mind, isn't that a relief? Isn't that a good thing? It was back in 2019, just look this up quickly, that Alberta's premier said that he would follow Ontario in asking the province's universities and colleges to conform to free speech guidelines. The post-secondary education section of the United Conservative Party's platform. This was in May of 2019. So this was written by Madeline Smith with Star Calgary. I'm citing her great reporting. It was the platform that said that the United Conservative government would require the province's universities and colleges to develop, post, and comply with free speech policies that conform to the University of Chicago Statement on Principles of Free Expression. And they sort of invoked the threat of funding. In other words, if these universities want to keep receiving the funding, they do. And obviously that's a whole can of worms right now if you want to talk about post-secondary funding. But they said, basically, let me put it in layperson's language, if you keep, allowing all these over-caffeinated lefties to talk and you don't allow the extreme, right wing, if you don't allow Jordan Peterson to come on campus, for example, that's a name that'll invoke a lot of passion with people, I know. If you don't allow Jordan Peterson to come to campus, well, then maybe we won't fund you. That's kind of the cut to the chase version of what Premier's saying. I mean, the hilarious part about it is, to cite another great report, if you look at Sprawl Calgary's deep dive into Jason Kenney's history, including at that Jesuit college in San Francisco, Jason Kenney did everything he could, including physical intimidation. Read the story. Read it for yourself, to have dissenting opinions shut down. As a matter of fact, because that college that he didn't graduate from was allowing people with a pro-life perspective to set up a table on campus and talk to people, Jason Kenney tried to have the college's designation stripped. Like, Jason Kenney will not allow his MLAs to do interviews with me, for example. So tell me more about your commitment to free speech, Premier. Tell me more about it. love it. I mean, I just honestly can't help myself but laugh. Interviews like that one we just heard are made possible by teams that support us day in and day out. Teams like Westworld Computers that have been family owned for more than 40 years, including right here in our home city of Edmonton. Now, they know that, everybody wants to get their hands on the brand new MacBook Pro, like the one we just picked up, that brand new iPad or the iMac that Sam's on, but sometimes budget gets in the way. That's a reality. That's life. It's why they're proud to also carry a deep lineup of refurbished, gently pre-owned gear from the big desktops all the way down to Apple Watches and iPhones. They ensure that the original software is installed, they've cleaned them up, and they come with warranty. You can find that at Westworld Computers. Also want to let you know that the teams at Dairy Queen in Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park wanted to say a huge thank you to Real Talkers that absolutely showed up en masse through the drive-thrus. And even by those delivery apps around the Valentine's Day holiday, they said that they went through more Valentine's Day cakes, including the Choco Cherry Love, than they ever thought that they would. It must have been Sam Brooks' ringing endorsement. I think that's what it was. Your Dairy Queen voiceovers really resonated with the Real Talkers, Sam.
I don't know what you're talking about.
See what I mean? See this guy? Choco Cherry Love. Well, Dairy Queen in Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park want you to know that when you swing on by, they appreciate your support and they love when you tell them that you're Real Talkers. Make sure you show them a little bit of love. All right. Blake's ready to go. Yeah, I want to get into this. This is serious subject matter. And Sam, can you show me his tweet from yesterday? This is a story that absolutely infuriated people. It's a heartbreaking story as well. The city of Edmonton, by way of Edmonton police officers, booted a number of houseless individuals into minus 30-degree frigid cold because they were seeking shelter in a transit station. And I think to say that people in the city are enraged would be an understatement. Blake, yesterday, I saw this tweet and immediately invited him on the show. He said, my cousin passed away living on the streets of Edmonton last year. I knew him growing up as a jokester, a fisherman, a proud Métis. But due to intergenerational trauma, he says he was also a drug addict and he was houseless. I want to see real recognition, says Blake, and support for our relatives in the streets. It's time we listen. We need to hear their voices, listen to the stories of the people. It's often those facing the problem who have the right solutions. We've been looking forward to welcoming Blake to the program for quite some time. He's Director of Public and National Affairs with the Métis Settlements General Counsel. Welcome to the show,